So in this video, we're going to talk about another method of looking at your natal chart. So I've done a couple of videos on the house method of interpretation, which is looking at your chart and helping you to understand what your energy is like through each one of the 12 houses. In this one, it's going to look at the planets. It's going to start with Pluto and your soul's focus, and then it's going to go from the sun all the way out to Neptune. So let me share my screen here and we'll walk through how this looks and how it works. So with all of these symbols, I'm going to go through all of these symbols and kind of walk through it. It's all of these are by house, sign, and aspects, right? But I'm not really going to cover the aspects. I'm going to touch on it briefly, but I'm going to mainly focus on the house and the signs just to give you a good foundation. I'll probably create another video which goes a little bit deeper, but just doing this, you're going to see if you do your chart from this perspective, it's going to give you a lot of information. And so we start with Pluto. What house is it in? What sign is it in? What is the polarity house? What planets are in that? What sign is on the cusp of the polarity house? That'll give you the evolutionary intent for this lifetime. Where do I want to expand, grow, evolve, and become empowered? Right. So we start there. And then we go to the planets and we're like, okay, well, once we get a good understanding of what Pluto is showing us in the chart, the polarity house, and that entire band of energy, well, we look at the sun and it's like, well, how am I giving that purpose and meaning? Right? What does all of these experiences mean to me? And so I use the example here of a sun in Sagittarius. A sun in Sagittarius is going to probably have a philosophical approach to this, and that's how it's going to give their experience a meaning, right? Like a bigger picture, a bigger picture representation of what's going on here, right? Like we're multidimensional beings and we incarnate multiple times in this reality, and we're more than just our body and our five senses, right? Like there's going to be some kind of philosophical or even religious slant to this experience. And so your sun by house, sign, and aspects will give you that. Then we move to the moon, which is personal, right? It's living it daily. And so the moon is the egocentric structure that gets created through your life experiences. Really, it gets created in childhood by your conditioning and by your parents, right? And then as you go through life, through school and friends, and so it starts to form your perspective. So the moon is representative of that. So what is my perspective? But it's also your emotional state. And I call it like your overarching emotional state because your emotions change sometimes minute by minute, day by day, right? So they're never a steady state. But when I say overarching emotional state, I'm talking about like my example here is moon in Libra, right? So your overarching emotional state is slanted towards finding harmony and harmony and balance within, which then projects harmony and balance within relationships, right? So what are you living it? How are you living this on a daily basis? And what lens are you looking through in this lifetime? What is your perspective? Then we move out to Mercury, which Mercury is how am I mentally constructing this, right? What kind of information am I going to want to learn, right? To continue to become empowered in this Pluto and the polarity house of Pluto, right? What's my intellectual structure? How do I communicate stuff? And so we'll look at the sign and the house placement of Mercury, which will give us information on how you are experiencing this energy. And then we go to Venus, which is values, how you're inwardly relating to yourself, and then how that gets projected out to other people. But it's also how am I establishing, rooting this and making it real, right? Like how am I this understanding that I have, this purpose I'm giving, the lens I'm looking through, my mental reality, how is that getting grounded here in this reality? How am I making a living? How do I value myself? How is that coming out in relationship to other people, right? And so that's the Venus placement. And then we go to Mars, which is, it's like, it's the lower octave of Pluto, but think of it as like it's taking cues from your soul. So it's desires which prompt action, is how I describe it. So what are you going to go to, right? What actions are you going to take? So we'll look at Pluto, the house and the sign of Pluto. Sorry. We'll look at Mars, the house and the sign that Mars is in, to give us some clues on that. Then we go farther out to Jupiter. What is my philosophy? What's the bigger picture here? And so Jupiter starts to form a belief system, right? So it could be religion, it could be just I have this belief, which could be I'm an atheist, or I have a belief in I subscribe to the Jewish religion, or I'm Roman Catholic, or I'm a Buddhist, like you name it, right? As you have life experiences, you start to, what do I believe, right? What is my belief system? And so that is symbolized by Jupiter. Then we arrive at Saturn. And so the luminaries, the sun and the moon, and these planets that I discussed prior to Saturn are inside of Saturn's orbit. And so you can think of Saturn as the structure. So this is your conscious awareness in this reality, is the symbol of Saturn. So all of the planets outside of Saturn's orbit, like Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, is like your soul or your unconscious or past life experiences, things that are beyond this reality. So Saturn is, I like to look at Saturn as like, so you have a sun sign, right? And most people are familiar with that. But look at your Saturn sign, because that's really your conscious awareness and how you're constructing your reality. Right. And so, like for me, I have a Saturn in Cancer. So my conscious awareness is more the emotional side, right? The Cancer side, the flowing side. That is my conscious awareness. And so all of these symbols inside of Saturn, build my structure, how I understand myself to be in this reality. And then you go outside of that to Uranus. And so Uranus is, well, if once I build a structure, Saturn, that's cool because I have a structure. But for my evolution, that structures need to get, it's going to need to change at certain points in time. And so Uranus is liberating from Saturnian structures, right? So Uranus, from, if you watch some of my other videos from an EA perspective, is like your soul's long-term cache. And so all of your past life experiences, all of your soul's experiences beyond this reality is symbolized by Uranus. And so it's past life stuff could come through, right? That needs to get processed. It symbolizes insights. It symbolizes integrating your experiences and learning from them and gaining wisdom and removal of things that no longer serve you. Uranus is always poking at Saturn, right? Just from an analogy standpoint, it's always poking at Saturn to say, hey, this conscious awareness you've constructed, or this reality you've constructed in your mind, when it's time, we're going to have to move that forward, right? We're going to need to change those structures a bit, maybe even change your philosophy, change your Mercury, change the way you're thinking about things, change your Venus, the way you feel about yourself, and how that gets projected in reality, in relationships, right? And so Uranus will symbolize that in the chart. And then we arrive at Neptune, which is transcendence or ultimate meaning. So I think of Neptune as definitely the spiritual side of your being, right? Your soul and what it experiences when it's not in a body, right? Or being able to feel collective energies is a Neptune, is the symbol of Neptune. And it's unconditional love, Neptune. It's like everything is based in love. Everything we experience is based in love. And so, where is that going to be experienced for you? By house and sign, right? And so, we'll look at that in the examples. And then the north and the south node of the moon. And so these correlate to the moon, obviously, but it's the continual life experience between past and present relative to your natal moon. So how you're experiencing this reality moment to moment. And so, what sign and what house is it in? And so, you're going to continue to filter experiences through that axis. And then, how you give it personal form is related to your moon, right? What sign is your moon in and house? And so, with that, let's go to some example charts and actually see this in action. So I went into my software program and I'm like, okay, let me grab a couple example charts. So there was a couple that I used a while ago. I don't remember what I used them for, but I grabbed them this time. And so the first one is Alanis Morissette, and the second one is Aaron Rodgers. And so you'll probably know one or both of them. And so this first chart here is Alanis Morissette. So what I know about her is I used to really like her when I was younger. Really good singer. I know she's been through some different relationships. Um, she had like an edginess to her in the beginning. Certainly, like isn't it ironic was a song she had, and then what was the one where she was really angry? um, you ought to know, I think was the name of it. Yeah, that's it. Right. So I know there was that kind of a slant to her creativity and her music. And then as she's progressed through her life, I heard recently, I don't really follow her too much now, but I heard she did release a meditation album or song, right? So I know she's done a lot of inner work. I know that she's tilted more towards the spiritual side of things and the psychological side of things now. And so I at least know that about her, but obviously I'm not close to her. So I don't know on a day-to-day basis how she's experiencing this energy. But I'm just going to use this chart to walk through this planetary method of interpretation. And so let's walk through, or let me pull this back up, right? And so we start at Pluto. So the evolutionary intent for this lifetime plus the polarity point. The polarity point is usually the evolutionary intent. Like I want to integrate that energy into my experience. And then it's a prior life focal point and where you will feel secure in that area, right? And so let's go back to her chart and we start there with Pluto, right? And so we see she's got a Pluto in Libra retrograde in the third house, and then the polarity is the ninth house, and she's got Pisces on the cusp of the ninth house. And so her soul focus here, say soul focus for this lifetime is this axis. So the third house, Pluto in Libra, third house Pluto is around communication. It's the logical mind, it's understanding things, it's gaining different perspectives, it's maybe the extremes of that energy, right? Like not being able to express yourself or misinformation or just a Pluto's soul in the third house could be just somebody that's just naturally smart, right? Like the scientist, right? That just knows things, right? Can be part of this energy too. And so think of like the entire band of communication and what can be experienced there. And so for her, her soul focus is here. It's in the sign of Libra. So the Libra generation is changing the way we relate to other people, like relationship dynamics is part of it, trying to find harmony and balance, right? So that's part of her self empowerment journey. And it's in retrograde, meaning she's been here experiencing this before. So this is not new to her. She's just a continuation kind of trying to build, trying to experience all that she can at an individuated soul level in this area. And so we have Virgo here, which is purification, refinement, strong analytical mind. We have Libra, finding harmony and balance. We have Pisces up here, which is more of a spiritual slant to it, the larger perspective, so to speak. And Aries here, which is part of this house as well, which is I need to do me, right? So there's the soul focus. And then we drop over to the sun, right? So if you remember here, we have the sun is integration, purpose, and meaning of the evolutionary intention, right? So we're going to feed everything back to this third and the ninth house. And so, where is her sun? What sign is it in? What house is it in? That's how she's going to derive purpose and meaning. And so for her sun is over here. It's in Gemini and it's in the 11th house. I'm going to need to communicate, Gemini. I'm going to need to understand things logically and be able to communicate those to humanity. 11th house, right? The 11th house is contributing to the larger whole. I would say check on that one. Then we go to the moon, right? And so the next layer in this one is the moon, living it daily, giving it personal form, perspective, their ego, your ego creation, your overarching emotional state, right? And so let's take a look at her moon placement. And so for Alanis, her moon is in Scorpio and it's in the 4th house. The emotions, how she lives it daily, is got a Scorpio flavoring to it. So Scorpio is depth of experience, needing to go deep, needing to uncover any emotional stuff that was not realized or was not catered to or was not accepted or was not expressed. 3rd house when she was younger and all throughout her life, right? So on a daily basis, the moon in Scorpio, I need to go deep. I need to understand my emotional dynamics. It's really important to me. 4th house, her, how she feels inside. And I'm going to pull in Uranus because Uranus is conjunct the moon. But when I get to Uranus, I'll pull that in. So there's the moon. And then if we go back to what I shared prior, then we move to Mercury, which is the mental organization. What does this all mean, right? Every life experience I have, this soul journey of becoming empowered through this 3rd and ninth house, what does it all mean? The kind of information that I'll want to learn so that I can build an understanding. And so let's go back to her chart. Let's locate Mercury. And so her Mercury is in Cancer and it's blending energies with Saturn, but we'll get to that. So Mercury in Cancer in the 12th house. Well, Cancer is the ruler of the moon. So we're going right back here to the moon, right? So how am I going to understand things and what will I need to call to me so that I can logically understand my reality? Back to Cancer energy, emotional stuff, which is going to be reflected in relationships. And then it's in the 12th house, which the 12th house is the Pisces house, which is spiritual side. But the 12th house could also mean unconscious material, right? Maybe stuff from past life. She's going to have to want to understand why she has emotional triggers or why she's projecting emotional needs, right? And so it goes back to the moon in Scorpio, depth of experience. Well, I'm going to need depth of experience to be able to understand that for myself so that I can communicate that and I can understand the bigger perspective, right? It all goes back to this axis. So we have Mercury, and then we are going to go to Venus, which are the values, how she's inwardly relating to herself, how this is going to be, how all of this experience is going to be established, rooted, and made real. And it's also what energies is she going to attract to her, and then what is going to be reflected back to her in relationships. And so we go back and we locate Venus for Alanis, and it is up in her 10th house in the sign of Taurus. And so, how is she going to ground this into reality? Venus, Taurus, 10th house. So, Taurus is the inner side of Venus. And just a side note here, whenever I see Venus in Taurus in somebody's chart, that's usually an indicator of a strong voice or a singer, right? And so, how is she going to ground and root this into reality? Her understanding here in this third and ninth house. The 10th house is coming out in society. She sings in society, right? So, quite literal, right? And then the other part of this, the other part of Venus is how do you sustain your existence, right? It's survival of the species, so to speak. And so, yeah, she makes money from singing in public, right? So, Venus and Taurus, right? And then the Taurus side of Venus is through relationships, she's going to understand for herself her needs and her values, Taurus, right? So, what's the next layer of this? So we go back to this planetary method and we look at Mars. Where is her Mars? It's the lower octave of Pluto, desires which prompt action. So it's innate. She's instantly going, she's without thought going to head towards this area, right? To continue her soul's evolution and feeling empowered in this third and ninth house axis. And so we look for her Mars. And her Mars is over here again, where the Mercury is located in Cancer in the 12th house. Doubling down, right? It's like her soul desires are going to go towards emotions, right? I need to have experiences. I need to have situations. I need to have people to help me understand my emotional well being, right? My emotional self in the 12th house. The other part of Mars energy is needing to separate from things that no longer serve you or separate from ideas that are no longer serving you. So Mars in Cancer, maybe I need to remove myself from people that are not catering to my emotional needs or do not see me or don't allow me to authentically express my emotional needs. Or maybe I will express my emotional needs with Mercury sitting out in Cancer, and I'll get projected on from other people who have their own emotional stuff that they're putting onto me, right? What does that mean for me? So that's just going to come naturally to her. And so what's the next layer here in the planetary method? We go to Jupiter. So, what is my philosophy, right? So, if you think of all of these archetypes we've just went through, so we went through the sun, we went through the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. Now we're building a philosophy. So, what is my philosophy? What's the bigger picture? And there's always a need to continue to grow and evolve. So, what energies am I working through in this lifetime? Always correlating to that third and ninth house, right? The refinement of Virgo, Libra, harmony and balance, third house communication, ninth house Pisces, the spiritual side of her, Aries, I need to do this. So it's all relating back to that. And so let's locate her Jupiter. So we have her Jupiter in Pisces in the eighth house. Well, spiritualize, right, is definitely a word you can put on Pisces. Pisces can be, if you're talking about the full spectrum of Pisces, it could be getting a little bit lost in somebody else's perspective. It could be disillusionment, can be part of this. But like the higher expression of this is just to spiritualize, to have a spiritual philosophy behind life, right? And it's in the eighth house, which is the Scorpio house, which is blending energies with other people, right? And so, how is she going to develop this philosophy, or what is the philosophy going to be focused around? Pisces energy, right? The more of who we are, the beyond the five senses, right? So that's going to be part of her getting empowered here in this third and ninth house axis. And then we go to the next piece of the puzzle here, which is going to be Saturn. Structure of your conscious awareness in this reality, the totality of all planetary functions prior to Saturn. So if you look at Saturn, Saturn in our solar system is the bridge or the border between the inner and the outer planets. So everything inside of Saturn is considered an inner planet, and then everything outside of Saturn's orbit is an outer planet, more generational, more beyond the five senses, right? And so think of Saturn as your conscious awareness, how you're constructing your reality, right? And so how is Alanis going to construct her reality, right? What is it going to be based off of? And so we locate her Saturn, which is blending energies with Mercury in the 12th house, and it's in the sign of Cancer. So we're right back again. So we have all of this energy, right? We're focused here, but we can also pull this in. All of that energy in Cancer goes back to the moon and to Pisces, right? And so now, what is her conscious awareness? It's Cancer energy. It's going back to her emotional state, her emotional well being in the 12th house, which is the Pisces house. And it needs to be in depth, the moon in Scorpio. So we start layering these archetypes, right? But just going back to just Saturn, she's a Saturn in Cancer consciousness, right? That is where she's deriving everything through, is Cancer and Saturn. And it's blending energies with Mercury, which means she has to communicate it, right? And I'd say if you know Alanis Morissette and you know her music and how her music has changed over time, you can see that, at least from like a fan's point of view, watching her Venus in the 10th house, you can see how she went to the Scorpio type volatile type emotions that were being expressed in her early music has now gone all the way up to creating meditation tracks, right? So she went to like the mad, angry, you ought to know music. Isn't it ironic, right? Like that kind of stuff, to more thank you, India music, traveling, Sagittarius, which we're going to get into that, right? To develop her philosophy. She went to that style of music to now meditation, right? So you can see how this is playing out in her natal chart. And so we have Saturn, and then what's the next part in the puzzle? Go back to my document here. And we wind up going to Uranus, which is liberation from Saturnian structures. So your conscious awareness, Saturn, builds a reality, right? This is my truth and my reality at this point in time. Well, Uranus comes in and it's like, well, in order for your soul to continue experiencing and evolving, there's going to need to be changes to that structure throughout your lifetime. So Uranus is that symbol. And so we go back to her chart and we locate Uranus in her chart. And we see that Uranus is down here. Excuse me, is down here. I'm losing my voice a little bit. Uranus is down here in the 4th house in Libra, retrograde, and it's blending energies with the moon and Scorpio, right? And so if you watched any of my other videos, Uranus in evolutionary astrology is like all of your soul's past experiences. And it kind of gives an indication of your gift, skills, and abilities, and potentially some trauma that needs to get processed. And so it's in the house of relationships, right? Uranus in Libra, and it's blending with that moon in Scorpio, which is I need to experience things deeply in relationships, projecting stuff, getting projected on, depth of experience, powerlessness, powerfulness, right? Scorpio, psychological type stuff, understanding things deeply. And because Uranus is in retrograde, maybe having to process some trauma within relationships, Libra in past lives may have been part of her journey, right? Here in this lifetime. And so that's going to continue to break apart Saturnian structures at certain points in her life when she needs it, right? For her evolution. And it's all going back to I need to find harmony and balance by purification. I need to communicate it. I need to bring on board the spiritual side of myself, and I need to express that out in society, right? It's all going back to that energy. And so that's the Uranus function. And then we go back to the next layer of this, which is the Neptune part, which is transcendence, ultimate meaning. And so the spiritual side of it, the realization or the understanding that we are all connected, we're all an expression of source energy, and everything we experience here is a representation of unconditional love. Show it trying to know who we are at a soul level, right? So then we go back and let's take a look at where her Neptune is. And so for Alanis, her Neptune is here in the fifth house in Sagittarius. And so, how does she understand the bigger perspective beyond the five senses? The feeling of us all being connected. It's in the Leo house, which is creativity, which is related to children, but it's creative. Think of the underlying energy of this house as creative self actualization. And I need absolute freedom to do it. It's in the sign of Sagittarius. So I will need to continue to learn, to continue to explore, to be able to express myself creatively. And if we wanted to just take it a step deeper, what's the ruler of the fifth house? It's the sun. It's in Gemini in the 11th house. I'm going to need to express myself to humanity, maybe through singing, through my voice, right? So you see how this starts building. Relating back to the third house, finding your voice, right? And so we go to the next layer in the puzzle. And we go to the nodes of the moon. So this is the daily lived experience between your past and your present, right? And so there's the polarity here, which then gets integrated through the moon. And so let's take a look at those symbols in her chart. And so we look for the south node and the north node. And for her, she's got a south node in Gemini in the 11th house, north node in Sagittarius in the fifth house. And then her moon is in Scorpio down there in the fourth house. Although I'll include Uranus in that too, because you can't not separate the two. They're too close. They're blending energies, right? And so she's comfortable here. This is her past, right? South node, Gemini, 11th house. So comfortable out in humanity, contributing to groups and associations, understanding different people's perspectives, understanding different ways of living. So she's used to learning in that way, taking in a lot of information from many different sources, especially since her Pluto's in the third house, right? So she's comfortable in that area for sure. And then her north node, which is the newer expression for her, potentially, right, is Sagittarius in the fifth house, being able to define her own truth, gathering all of that information, knowledge, teachings from those 11th house experiences, and developing Sagittarius, her own truth, and continuing to expand her awareness, right? So, North Node in Sagittarius. And then on a daily basis, that gets understood and integrated personally through her lens of Scorpio, the moon in Scorpio, fourth house, right? It's deeply personal to her. And so the Scorpio energy is kind of her perspective, her ego creation going deep, right? Probably if you sat down with Alanis Morissette and started to get to know her personally, she would go deep. She would have a philosophical slant to her. She would probably want to talk about her experiences, talk about your experience. What do they mean from a psychological perspective, right? That's probably a big part of Alanis Morissette for sure. And I mean, that certainly came out in her music, right? And so that coupled with the Uranus in Libra needing to individuate, needing to find her own voice, needing to find harmony and balance within, right? And so we go back to the soul focus here. And all of those planetary archetypes are leading back to making her, giving her this life experience to become empowered in this area of her life. And so I'll do one more example here. We're going to jump to Aaron Rodgers. And so Aaron Rodgers, actually, no, before we do that, let's jump back again because I want to just touch on aspects here. So obviously I don't have any aspects showing, but let's do it, right? So boom, right? So we have a lot more context we can add to all of these archetypes by just looking at what other planets are they aspecting? What type of aspects? Are they squares? Are they oppositions? Are they inconjuncts? Are they trines? Are they quintiles? Are they sextiles? Like what other type of energies, right? And so I'm not going to cover this here. I'll probably do another video to cover that, but like let's just look at Pluto, right? Okay, so from a soul perspective, a square 90 degrees, right? So tension with what? Mercury, Saturn, Cancer, Pluto in Libra, in relationships, emotional dynamics, which will cause tension. Why will they cause tension? To keep her moving forward, right? And tension to help her understand and become empowered in this third, ninth house axis, right? And so when you see a square, that could also mean from a soul perspective, I need to potentially remove myself from people, right? That upset me emotionally, right? Or that are not honoring of my emotional presence or what I need to say, Mercury, right? So that can be part of this energy. So it adds more context to it. But like I said, I'm not going to get into the aspects here. I'm just going to do the archetypes in their signs in the houses. And so let's go to Aaron Rodgers. And so Aaron Rodgers, he's a quarterback now for the New York Jets. He played years for the Green Bay Packers. He won a Super Bowl. He's an MVP. So let me think of what other things I know about him. He is pretty, his energy is pretty strong, pretty projecting. He does have different opinions than other people. Um, I know that he was recently in a relationship. I don't think he's in it now, but he had a relationship with somebody called Blue of Earth, who is a very spiritual being, very familiar with floating in Neptune land and being very connected to you'd call it universal consciousness, very familiar with plant medicine. So that type of stuff, which brought, I'm sure, a very unique perspective to Aaron Rodgers, which I'm pretty sure up until that point, he was not fully open to that type of expression, right? And so there was more of a spiritual influence on his life. I don't think he's connected with her anymore, but I know that he did an ayahuasca journey. I caught a bit of one interview that he had where he talked about being able to feel unconditional love, and he's like, it's a feeling that I don't know I can accurately describe, right? And so he's had some transcendental experiences and definitely was highly influenced through that relationship. And so we look at this, and let's just go through this relatively quickly since we already did one. Is we look at Pluto, right? And I know it's there with Venus, and I am going to cover that, but it's Pluto in Scorpio in the sixth house with the 12th house polarity. And so we talked about Scorpio in the Alanis one. The Scorpio and Pluto generation is I need to go deep. That generation is going to break apart structures that are no longer serving from a collective standpoint, but individually, Scorpio, psychology, understanding the transference of not the transference of energy, but the transformation of energy. Like think of the phenomenon of being born or death or the metaphysics, right, as part of that. And so it's in the sixth house, which is the Virgo house, which is strong analytical mind, purification, refining my self expression, being of service, right? And so he's got Libra, relationships is on the cusp, and he's got Scorpio. And then the 12th house is the Pisces house. So that's more of a spiritual slant, being onboarded in this lifetime to the sixth house Pluto, which his self empowerment journey is he's got a strong analytical mind. Purification is definitely part of it. Discernment is definitely part of it. But now bringing on board some of maybe the unconscious material from prior lives can be part of it, or just a spiritual presentation, or 12th house having to remove himself from different energies, right? To make sure that his energy stays clean and he doesn't feel energetically drained. So he's got Aries there, which is instinctual. I'm going to navigate instinctively to do this, right? Which I think is a big part of that relationship that he went through. So then we move on. Well, how is he integrating this? The sun. How is he how is he how is he deriving meaning from his life experience? Sagittarius, philosophy. I think that's the example that I gave, right? Is philosophy, being able to continue to expand and evolve. And it's in the eighth house, the Scorpio house. So we're right back again, right? It's like I'm going through depth of experience, be able to understand this experience in a philosophical type of way. And at least the last few snippets of interviews I heard with him, yeah, he definitely speaks in that terms of looking at the bigger perspective, right? I remember him saying, like, football is not everything, right? It's not who I am. It's part of what I am, it's part of what I do, but it's not everything. So there was a philosophical slant to his presentation. And I know there's conjunctions there, and I'm going to cover that. And then there's the moon. How does he personally live this on a daily basis? What is his egocentric structure, right? It's in Scorpio again, in the seventh house of relationships, right? So he's integrating this and he's bringing meaning to it from a personal perspective, and he's forming his egocentric structure, the lens he's seeing life through the lens of Scorpio in the seventh house in relationships, needing to go deep emotionally in relationships. The same symbol that Alanis had in her chart. Hers was in the fourth house, which is more personal. Aaron Rodgers is in the seventh house, which is more the Libra side, right? Which is more, I'm going to understand my emotional dynamics through going deep in relationships with others, right? Psychology, understanding why to my experiences. Then the next step in this is Mercury. So where's Mercury? And I know it's blending with Neptune, and I'll get to that. But Mercury, how do I logically understand things, right? Well, it's in Sagittarius, the same sign of his sun, and it's in the ninth house, which is the natural Sagittarius house. So philosophy, right? Developing my intuition, following my intuition, understanding things from a higher perspective. That is how I'm going to understand things. I'm going to need to call to me people that can help me develop that that type of understanding for myself. Sagittarius, and I think that Blue of Earth individual was definitely a representation of that for him. And then we go to Venus. And I know that's blending with Pluto, but Venus, actually, I'll pull that in. So Venus, how am I grounding it? How do I feel about myself? How do I ground this in the reality? How do I make this real? How do I support myself in this expression of my energy, right? How do I become empowered in this sixth house, 12th house axis? Venus in Libra, relationships. Pluto, Scorpio, going deep in relationships. Psychology, understanding my unique expression and what it means for me. Sixth house, purification. When I express myself in a certain way, what is the feedback that I'm getting, right? And being able to ask the question why. That's going to be a big part of how I feel grounded in this reality, continuing to go deep in relationships, purifying myself, sixth house. Then we go to Mars, the lower octave of Pluto, Mars, sixth house, Libra, again, relationships. And if, I mean, Aaron Rodgers is on a team with a bunch of people, he's been around coaches, he's been in college, he's had many relationships. That's a symbol of a Mars in Libra. I need many different relationships, many different perspectives, many different experiences. And we need to go deep, right? Into the psychology, depth of experience, powerfulness, feeling powerful, feeling powerless can be part of that, right? I'm going to innately go to those relationships that will help me there. Then we go beyond Mars and we're like, well, what's the philosophy build here, right? I'm pulling in the south node, but I can pull in the sun to this. I can pull in, I can pull in all this energy, but let's just stay focused here. Jupiter, Sagittarius, eighth house, right? And so, how am I going to develop my philosophy about this life experience? Sagittarius, it's at home in its sign of Sagittarius in the eighth house, the Scorpio house. So you see this, and and what I know about Aaron Rodgers is, yeah, he's a polarizing figure. He does have some confrontations. I think about on the football field, when he did play for the Packers, he is really good. And usually the Packers always beat the Chicago Bears, right? And so I know there was like a feud going back and forth between Bear fans and him. I know when he used to score touchdowns against the Bears, there was this whole thing where he would make this sign around his waist like he's the champion, he has the championship belt. I remember him saying to Bear fans that I own you. There's no way you can beat me, right? And so, sorry, I just like my sock slipped off there. So Aaron Rodgers can be a polarizing figure, right? And people will definitely push back on him and project on him, right? And so how is he going to form his philosophy? Eighth house, going deeply with people, merging energies, right? That's how I'm going to develop my philosophy. And it's going to keep me moving forward. And then we go to Saturn. What is his conscious awareness, right? What is his consciousness? What is the container? It's Saturn in Scorpio in the seventh house, back to Scorpio, back to Libra, seventh house. How am I going to become empowered in this sixth and 12th house axis? I'm going to understand it psychologically. I'm going to need to go in depth. It's going to be metaphysics. It's going to be understanding the cycles of life, understanding life transitions, understanding the stuff that Blue of Earth brought to him, which is the bigger container, universal consciousness, right? That's the seat of my consciousness. So I'm going to continue to build this structure of my awareness of this reality through the lens of Scorpio, going deep. What's going to keep moving that structure and keep redefining it and keep moving it forward so he can keep evolving? We're right back here again, right? Uranus, Sagittarius, eighth house, deeply merged energies with people, understanding things in depth, bringing people to me that will change my perspective, Sagittarius, right? So through my lifetime, I'm going to continue to evolve and move forward and change the structure of my reality through the lens of deeply merged energies. Uranus, Sagittarius, quick changes, people that hold, could be people that hold Uranus type energy, that are unique, that think outside of the box, that bring to him perspectives that change his structure of how he creates his reality, right? And then we have Neptune, which goes a step further, which is how do I spiritualize, right? The more of who I am. I'm not just this body, I'm not just these five senses. How do I connect to the more? In the ninth house, in Sagittarius, keep growing, keep learning, keep evolving, keep expanding, keep learning through depth of experience in relationships, right? So you have all of this energy here, all in the eighth and ninth house, all in Sagittarius, all of those archetypes, right? And so he's got a huge Sagittarius presence. So he's continuing to gain wisdom, whether he's aware of it consciously or not. And he is, I mean, just the little I know about him with some of the interviews and some of the things that he said, he definitely speaks philosophically. He's definitely had a lot of relationships, which has taught him a lot, I'm sure. And so that's certainly symbolized in this chart. Then we go to the nodes of the moon. How is this being experienced on a daily basis? How is it being integrated? Similar to Alanis, so the nodes are flipped for him. So he's got a south node in Sagittarius, right? And then he's got his north node in Gemini. And so usually when I see a south node in Sagittarius, I go back to like the childhood conditioning. His caregivers or parents had a certain philosophy. This is the way you do things, Sagittarius, right? A certain belief system that shaped his reality. Jupiter is right there, right? Maybe he had some strong influences, Leo figures, sun figures that said, this is the way we do things, right? Maybe it was in a unique way and that shaped his reality. Well, through this life experience, he's feeling this Sagittarius, defining the Sagittarius for himself, while North Node gathering other perspectives, Gemini, second house, building his own belief system, second house, which is the inside of Venus, which is what do I value? How do I communicate what I've learned? North Node in the second house. How do I make a living? How do I build my sense of self? Is through communicating my own belief system, second house. How I feel, second house. When I score a touchdown against the Bears, I'm going to let them know about it. North Node, Gemini, second house, right? And so, how is that getting integrated? The moon in Scorpio, seventh house, going deep. Maybe the extremes of that energy, maybe getting in people's face, right? Can be part of that. Having different opinions from people, then examining why do you have a different opinion? Why do I feel this way? What's the deeper meaning? Scorpio, right? So that's how this is all getting played out for him on a daily basis. And so all of that energy is to become empowered here, bring more of that energy into this sixth house so he can experience and become from a soul level fully empowered in this area. The Virgo house, purification, refining his energy, pulling in the spiritual side of him. 12th house, Aries energy. He's going to naturally do it. Aries related to Mars, right? And so that is the planetary method. And just looking at a preview of the next step, which is the aspects to this. So he's got an inconjunct here, which to Chiron. So I see that as I can't see you, or removal. And just because of the distance between Pluto and that Chiron, it's going to have a Scorpio experience for him, right? Meaning going deep, right? So he could have experienced this. Think of it as your soul standing on Pluto, opposed by first house Chiron Taurus. Chiron in Taurus is related to the second house. It's personal. Chiron is your sensitivity antenna. Usually it's a something that something that was deeply impactful for you in childhood, or it could even be while you're in the womb, something you sensed from the environment, right? Chiron in the first house. First house is literally him, how he projects his energy. Something that was really valuable to him, Taurus, may have been taken away. I would more lend towards that interpretation because this is a Scorpio aspect of that inconjunct, right? And you may not understand that, but I might cover that in another video. And so it's more of the Scorpio part of that, which is like something that was deeply valuable to him was removed, or he expressed himself, first house, in a way that he thought was authentic and was really important for him to do, that wasn't seen by the people close to him, and that impacted him, right? And so that's something that in this lifetime, through depth of experience, he may understand what that means for him, may be able to pinpoint that experience in his life, and then be able to become an example for others of how to authentically express themselves, to find value in themselves, Taurus, to express themselves uniquely. So that can be, so we're adding layers here now with the aspects, right? And then a sextile 60 degrees is easy. It comes natural, right? And so that's up here to his Mercury. So for his soul to evolve, the communication piece, the Sagittarius piece comes natural, right? It's an easy flowing energy for him. To be able to probably sit down with him and talk philosophically is probably, it's just like this for him, right? It's not a big deal. He gets it. It's easy for him. And so there you go. That is the planetary method of interpretation. So hopefully this was helpful. Like I said, I'm probably going to go deeper into this. I'll probably start pulling in aspects, maybe even some of the planetary nodes to add some more context to this. But if you do this in your own chart, you'll notice, you'll start seeing it, right? You'll be like, oh, I get it, right? So hopefully this was helpful. I appreciate you checking this out, and I will see you again in another video. Take care. So with that said, let's go ahead and I will share my screen and walk through the process. After the garbage truck leaves, a way of looking at your natal chart and interpreting, right? If you're looking at these planets and you're moving out from a natural progression, right? So you go from the sun. Wow, I skipped the moon, didn't I? I went right over the moon.